Regarding the formation of conscience, there are situations where one is less secure in making a moral judgment and uh, where taking a decision is difficult. Here are some criteria for deciding in conscience in these cases and in all cases in general. So, one, it is never allowed to do evil to obtain good. So, for example, it's important to pass an exam, but it's never allowed for me to then, oh, I'm going to get this person I know is really smart to do my assignments. Okay? Now, that's wrong, right? Secondly, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. It's important to take the time to reflect on how are my actions going to impact on others and then on my environment. So that's the golden rule. So then other people are as another me, so they should be treated fairly in the same way I ought to be treated. So that helps us to be more objective. Thirdly, charity demands always showing respect towards others, and also the fact that we must respect the conscience of others. So then, in a given circumstance, a person may feel that, okay, I think that this would be the better way to proceed, and another person may say no. Well, we must be willing to, for the sake of unity, to know that maybe we have to wait, okay, before something can be decided on, and that's fine, so that we don't just impose our opinions on others. We may feel clear that this is the better thing to do, but when it doesn't concern sort of very fundamental things, it's okay for the sake of unity. It's a better decision is, for the sake of unity, in our company or within our family, we can choose to say, okay, that I'm going to do something a little differently. So we must be willing to also change at times our what our what we what our in conscience what we have decided when we realize that there's new information that helps us understand that unity, that loyalty, and that charity may need to now change or inform our conscience and lead to a different decision. Before we begin conscience and sin, perhaps I can ask a trick question if you want. You remember we spoke about a true conscience and a false conscience. Now, someone may have a conscience that is false, but yet they can be very convinced that what the idea that they have or the decision that they about to make is something that they should do. Okay, so for example, okay, let's suppose someone is in a difficult situation. They go to they call the doctor. It's late at night. It's kind of they're very nervous, and the doctor says, okay, you know what? I think you take this medication for anxiety or whatever it is. Now, the doctor sort of knows the person, but maybe they don't know all the person's history, and whatever they prescribe, whatever they recommend, that does harm to the person. So we can say that the doctor made a mistake. Now, you're not necessarily a doctor, okay? That nowadays people go to their parents, they go to your mom, you go to your dad, you go to all kinds of people and say, well, this is affecting me, and sometimes people may say try this, and you might try something that is harmful. Now, they never intended to harm you, right? That's not their intention. Of course, they really want to help, and they were sure that this was doing something good for you, but then it was a mistake. It ended up doing harm to you. So then, now, the question there is that, let's suppose this person was absolutely sure, right? Okay, let's suppose that this is something that's going to help you. In that circumstance, whatever, hasty, in the circumstance of your call, then, in conscience, they really should recommend that medicine. I don't know if you get that point. It seems very, very strange, because then later on you say they should not have done that. You are right, okay, but objectively they should not have done that, but subjectively they should have done it in conscience. So these two things, you can say objectively they should have done it. I mean, should not have done it, sorry, because it caused harm. But subjectively, they should have done it because that was the judgment of conscience. And if you do not follow your conscience, then you commit sin. Okay? So I think that's very, very important to understand. Very often we kind of confuse that issue, because, okay, you are responsible for the harm that is caused still because it was something that you said. But however, you you are not you're not guilty of a sin by the choice that you made. So do you see how sometimes you can be not guilty of something, right? And you should not feel ashamed, but at the same time you are still responsible for harm, that is done. So it's very important for us to understand that, very clearly when we have to help people, and especially in spiritual direction. And we all have to give spiritual direction at some point, when we have people who are, depend on us, to people that we have to educate, whether it be our children or whatever environment, right? Okay, so that is very important to be as a preface, as we are going to speak about conscience and sin. So we understand that we're speaking about the guilty, and that often is accompanied by shame. Okay, we are dealing of a subjective reality, a judgment of conscience. But when the conscience is well formed, the subjective and the objective are normally aligned. So then that is where then we speak about we have a true conscience. Okay, so we talk about that. So our formation should lead us to always have a true conscience, so that the subjective and the objective align. But if we can have sometimes a false conscience, without any doubt, and we should follow our conscience, but then if the subjective and the objective don't align, and that means that there's a defect in our formation or in the facts or whatever whatever it might be. We spoke about a number of situations that can impair or affect our judgment of conscience. We spoke about that earlier. So let's go through then this slide. A human being must always obey the certain judgment of his conscience. So that is what we were saying. We were explaining. If he were deliberately to act against it, he would condemn himself. So, in other words, he commits a sin. The reason for this is that the command is taken in good faith as the expression of what directs the subject to his ultimate good, which is union with God. So the person then understands that by doing this, he is doing something that is good. And that means that he's achieving his end, his goal, as in terms of the fullness of human life. On the other hand, one should not follow a vincibly erroneous conscience. So here we are using the fancy terminology. Okay, so what this means is then it is that you should have known better, and you should have known better even in the moment. So in other words, the person is being careless. So in the case of the example that we're using, if the person just made a recommendation to take some drug or whatever, but was sort of careless, not really thinking, well, okay, let me see who this person, what are their conditions, am I aware of any other maybe illnesses that they have, do they have any any sort of illnesses that are chronic. So if they were careless, well, then that's different. So we said that they should have known better. So they were not justified in following that false conscience, because they would have lacked also that there would always be an element of doubt. Remember, we said that you have to follow a certain conscience. So once there's doubt, we spoke about that I think earlier, that you have to now go and seek more advice and get information, so that in order to be clear. So that's what this point is saying. Such a conscience experiences serious and practical doubt, which indicates a need for further inquiry before acting. In order to overcome doubt, one must acquire knowledge of the moral law. So then we have to then go back to the principles, so in terms of our responsibilities in that situation, being fair and so on. We spoke about keeping in mind that golden rule. So meaning acquiring knowledge of the moral law, seek advice from someone competent and sound. So we should not be hasty when we think that, okay, there is the information that is important that I need to acquire. And also to avoid allowing the conscience to become deformed by the disordered desires of the will. So we spoke about that before. That's, remember we said that we had, what it was. Oh yeah, that you end up, if you don't act according to how you think, you end up thinking like how you act, right? Or we also said, it takes a forest to hide a leaf. You may remember that. So we have to be careful not to be deformed, not to deform our conscience, because then we can have the impression of being very, very certain, but our conscience could be habitually false because it has become sort of hardened or deformed. Now, here we have a table, here it is, that summarizes a bit what we have been saying about conscience and sin. It uses ethical terminology, so that you may find this a little challenging, but that's okay. I mean, we've explained more or less everything here already, but we're just gonna go it over again using more kind of a, we can say, more specific or more ethical terminology. So we have 4 columns. The first column speaks about the objective moral nature, the capacity of something to bring about good. Okay, so for the example that we gave about, okay, someone is recommending, from a call or whatever, a drug, right? And now the objective moral nature of this drug can be good, and it might be that this drug is going to now help this person to come out of some panic situation or whatever it is. Okay, so there's an objective moral good, right? And then so the person can say, what's in conscience, I understand this person's situations, they're my patients, I've taken into account their chronic illnesses, I've asked them all the questions that I need, and I know that in conscience that this is recommending this drug, that I take it right now is good. Okay, and so therefore in conscience I do that action, and so my guilt value is merit. I gain merit. It is, I am now, I'm a better person for making a good decision because I'm acquiring this habitual habit of doing good, right? And perhaps I may have had to, well, gosh, have to get up and ask those questions that I have to overcome. Sometimes there's a little reluctance to get involved in a situation, or you're tired or whatever it is. So there was, what person may have become grow in charity from that, doing that deed. Okay, so but there are other situations which, okay, this it's as a we spoke last time about where someone, again, there's a drug they recommend they can do it, but a person may omit to recommend for that drug. Because there'll be a call and they said I should recommend it, but then they don't do it. Perhaps because they are thinking that, well, for whatever reason, might be some selfish reasons, because then they don't want to get involved, because they don't have to follow up the next day. They perhaps it's not a person that they are, that they're very much connected with. Who knows? Whatever reason is. But at times, maybe they're very angry with this person, and they say, well, look, you know what, this person has been habitually non-compliant, so you know what, I'm just going to not take this call and say, look, I can't help you, find somebody else to help you. And so that they omit to do something that their conscience says that they should do, okay, because of, they said they're upset, they're angry with this person, they're giving into that sort of unforgiveness or whatever it might be. So that would be a sin. Okay, let's skip over the blue. And then we go down. We said that sometimes there's a moral nature, something is bad. So as we said, that maybe you are recommending a drug, but your conscience tells you that, I'm being hasty, I'm being negligent, I'm being careless. So your judgment recognizes that, okay, this drug which is going to do harm to this person is not maybe a drug that has a lot of side effects, and or maybe it's a drug that needs to be given under specific circumstances, and you kind of neglect to determine if all those circumstances are given. So your conscience tells you it's bad, but still you do it because, oh, I just want to get this person off your back. Well, that would be a sin. Now your conscience can also say that this is bad and say, you know what, I'm not going to do it, and you're going to be strong and you're going to tell this person, well, you know what, I need more time, and I'll call you in the morning or whatever it is, but I'm not in a position to make a decision right now. Well, that would be meritorious. Okay. Now there are situations. Now this so you may observe that in the situations that we have seen, the good, bad, in terms of objective moral nature, the judgment of the conscience, that the conscience here is true, and that is so important that the subjective and the objective line up. These people, their conscience are well formed, even though they, as you see, that in some case they may sin. So they may lack the ability to control their emotions in terms of what they want to do, but their conscience sort of is well formed, because it tells them that, look, you're doing something, you are actually doing something bad, or the case where you're omitting something good. Now, there are cases where the conscience may not be well formed. We looked at the cases where there's a lax conscience, and there can be a scrupulous conscience. So the case where something is good and your conscience says it's bad, that's a scrupulous conscience. Okay? And if the person does something that their conscience tells them is bad, they commit a sin. Okay, and that's why it's so, having a scrupulous conscience really doesn't make sense. Okay, and because you can end up, actually, sinning unnecessarily if you want to. But as someone who has a scrupulous conscience, so they're at mass, and for whatever reason they're just bombarded by, oh my gosh, I shouldn't go to communion because, on the way here I was really mean to, on the road I was, I got very angry with someone who gave me a bad drive. Okay, they didn't respond, they didn't do anything, but they just got angry. But sometimes scrupulous can make you think that it was a sin just to get angry, but it's not. That's just a feeling. So the person then, feels that they're convinced, and so they say, okay, I'm not going to communion. So, okay, now, maybe, they're sure, but again, they need to overcome those scruples. But in some way, we have to say, in that specific moment, that would have been perhaps the right thing to do, because they felt that they would be committing a sacrilege, and they were convinced of that. Okay, so that would be the right thing to do, but sometimes a person can just feel that it is sin, but then for whatever reason they can say, oh, no, if I don't go to communion, what is my mom is going to say, my children are going to ask me all kind of questions, and so that's okay. That's the line above where we say good, bad, and they commit the bad act because they're just looking at how it looks, and that would be a sin. So it's very unfortunate, but actually you did something that was good. You didn't really do anything wrong, but you end up sinning for no reason. So we need to have people with scruples to understand that what the distinction between what is happening to you and what you actually do, deliberately, and what is actually a sin. Okay, so that we spoke about that earlier. About sin, or we talk about it a little more later as well. Those two criteria: you have to be full aware and full awareness and full consent. Okay, then there is a lax conscience, where someone does something that is bad, and the conscience says, okay, that is good. So that could be sometimes, you sometimes, for example, that, okay, at times persons in terms of safety can be very, very negligent. It's things like, for example, okay, using a motorbike and not wearing a helmet. There could be, for whatever reason, a person can have a very lax conscience and just think that those those rules are ridiculous or whatever it is. Okay, so they could just think that, it's not a big deal and whatever, and so they're doing something bad, but their conscience tells them that, yes, it's your freedom. You shouldn't just follow along these. You just go along or whatever it is, and okay, maybe it's not illegal, but let's suppose that, there, in some places, believe it or not, it's not legal to, or It is, but maybe nobody follows it. I've seen that in many countries where people are on motorbikes without helmets. I don't know if it's on the law books, but okay. But what we're trying to say then here is we're trying to present a scenario where a person, maybe some the people explaining to them and showing them the facts, but they say, well, everybody's doing it. It's not a big deal, and so they feel that it's a point of freedom, and they, but then, okay, well, in that case, someone who can neglect to do something, okay, can commit a sin. I'm not sure that's the best example, but in that case, it could be, a person really thinks that, the right thing to do would be, to give a person a drop. Like, for example, let's suppose they're pressured. Someone, hey, give me a drop, but you don't have a helmet, and they think that the right thing to do would be give that person a drop even though they don't have a helmet. That's a better example, I think. I think you can appreciate that one. So the person, is doing something bad because they're putting that person in a situation of danger, but they think that they're doing something good. But if they neglect to help that person, because again, they say, oh, this person did me something bad, I want to get back at them, well, then that's a sin. Now, it may be a case where the person then says, yeah, this would be good to help this person, and then they do it even though they're putting that person in harm. They're committed. They're sure that they're doing something that is not altogether good, right? But their conscience says, yes, I should help this person, but they don't have a helmet for them to use. But they do it because they think, yeah, this is the real thing to do is help this person, and this because nobody's really following up on wearing helmets or whatever. But they don't realize they're putting that person in a situation of a dangerous situation, and so that would be meritorious in that situation. And as you can see, that's a very tricky thing, a very tricky situation, because something like that happens all the time. I said if you travel to some other countries and not too far away, you see that happening, and really people allow people to give people rides and stuff without having helmets. They do that all the time, and they really think that they're doing good to that person, and they are doing some good to that person, yes, but it's not. But that of course should not be allowed. Okay, there's a minimum amount of safety that ought to be safeguarded and should ensure that someone who's riding on with you has a helmet. Okay, I don't want to insist too much on that point again, but you understand then how that works, right? So there's the conscience subjective, and then there's the objective, and we want to help people through formation to ensure that the subjective and the subjective align together, so that we're always working with a conscience that is both true and certain. We have to have a true and certain conscience, and then we also should follow our conscience. So that's the other aspect, right? So we have to have a true conscience, certain conscience. Okay, that is the criteria for being objective for action, but we also should follow a true and certain conscience, whether it tells us to do something or omit it. Case study. I was just obeying orders. Rudolf Höss was in charge of Auschwitz for 3 years. It was the most notorious death camp the Nazis ever devised. He oversaw the killing of 2,500,000 people. At the Nuremberg trials, he confessed that another 500,000 died from disease and starvation under his watch. Wow. Under his watch, they perfected the gas chambers to kill up to 2,000 people every hour. So other crazy things like that. Him and some of the other defendants at the Nuremberg trials, they said that we were just obeying orders. In fact, quote, Rudolfo Höss explained, and here we quote, "Don't you see, we SS men were not supposed to think about these things. It never even occurred to us. We were all so trained to obey orders without even thinking that the thought of disobeying an order would simply never have occurred to anybody, and somebody else would have done just as well if we hadn't. I really never gave much thought to whether it was wrong. It just seemed a necessity." Okay, so if you were the judge at the trial, what would you understand? How would you how would you regard this, this explanation Well, based on what we have discussed about conscience, what would you do? What would be your judgment? And take a friend off of out for coffee and discuss the case and see what if you were had to judge this case. What would you do and how would you explain your judgment?